Hello and welcome to CineMaine, where we look at films that are connected to Maine, whether they be set in Maine, filmed in Maine, or have any other loose connections to the state of Maine. With this week being the release of Edgar Wright's new action thriller The Running Man, I figured it was time to look at the 1987 film adapted from the same novel, which starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and came from the director of that movie where Shaq played a rapping genie?
Oh, that sucks.
Set in the dystopian year of 2017, an innocent yet condemned criminal, Ben Richards, is wrongfully arrested for not wanting to commit crimes against humanity. For not wanting to open fire at unarmed civilians, and is subsequently framed publicly for actions that his former coworkers committed the very same night. After being caught trying to flee the country following his escape from prison, Damon Killian, host of the game show The Running Man, decides to get Ben to compete in the hopes of boosting ratings for the state-sanctioned game show. The game show's premise? Incarcerated criminals get the chance to earn their freedom by surviving the life-or-death situations that the game show puts them through. Think the Hunger Games, only instead of drawing out a random teenager's name out of a hat, they make convicts in prison participate instead. What connects this film to Maine isn't where it's set, nor where it was filmed, but rather through the author who made the original source material, which, believe it or not, is actually Stephen King. King originally published the novel under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. Though far from the only novel King used this pseudonym for, it is certainly his most commonly known novel under the Bachman name. He started using this pen name rather early in his career, at a time when publishers would generally limit an author to one book a year. This motivated King to try writing other stories using a pseudonym, in the hopes of expanding his publication bibliography, while also trying to figure out if his success came from genuine talent or just luck. So he wrote a few novels using the Richard Bachman pen name, Richard being a reference to Donald E. Westlake's pen name, Richard Stark, and Bachman after one of King's favorite bands, Bachman Turner Overdrive. It's almost like he was taking care of business. Anyway, he ended up publishing a total of 7 novels under the Richard Bachman name, the most notable being The Running Man, published in 1982 and adapted for the screen 5 years later, the same year that gave us Predator. Fitting since Arnold and Jesse Ventura were both in those. The ironic thing is that the book is set this year, when the remake is coming out. Yet this film takes place 8 years ago. But I digress. While I had never seen this film before watching it for this review, it's not like I'd never heard of it before. I remember every once in a while growing up, I'd see an ad for this movie on the Sci-Fi Channel. At the time, I remember thinking it looked like a lot of action movies with muscle-bound leading men from that era. So when I found out years later that it was actually based off of a Stephen King story, that made me curious to say the least. Even though King is a very prolific and versatile writer, it's safe to say that when most people think about him, we think more about horror stories than we do action stories set in a dystopian future. But I found the idea of that kind of story coming from Stephen King to be rather intriguing. So I wondered, would this be more of a turn your brain off and enjoy the ride kind of flick like, say, Commando? Or would this be more of a thought-provoking sci-fi thriller that makes interesting commentary like, say, Terminator 2?
Both is good.
Yeah, overall I would say I enjoyed this movie for what I got, but I'd also be kinda lying if I said it may not have taken full opportunity of certain aspects. When I was reading about this film's production, I actually learned that this was going to originally be a drastically different film. Initially, the original Superman was going to play Ben Richards instead of Mr. Freeze, and the film was originally going to be directed by the guy who went on to direct an action thriller that was up for Best Picture at the Oscars that year. My guess is Christopher Reeve ended up leaving that film to do what I'm pretty sure was his personal least favorite film that he ever worked on, while Andrew Davis was fired after 2 weeks due to being behind schedule. According to Arnold, when the new director came in, the film ended up losing a lot of the deeper and darker themes in the original script, and the film itself became typecast as being more humorous and more action-packed, as a way of typecasting its new lead actor. Basically, with Christopher Reeve, this was gonna be First Blood. But because of Arnold, the studio decided to make another Rambo 2. Something Arnold himself seems to be disappointed with when it comes to this movie. I totally get where Arnold's coming from, but at the same time, I'd be lying if I said I didn't find the film entertaining overall. Going in, I was expecting your typical Schwarzenegger action flick, but after seeing the film, I will admit it is tonally bleaker than your typical Arnold movie. Maybe not as bleak as it could have been, but the dystopian future that this film portrays is so dystopian that it makes living in Minority Report's world seem ideal by comparison. Yet at the same time, this film is definitely more of a dumb and cheesy fun action flick than it is a dystopian sci-fi thriller. You would think these different tones would ultimately wind up clashing, and I'm sure for some viewers that's definitely the case. But for me, I still ended up enjoying the film a lot more than I thought I would going in. There's no mistaking that this film is very over the top. But then again, Stephen King has written some pretty over-the-top stories in his own career, so this film actually felt more kingly than I was expecting it to at parts. Although it is weird to think that both this film and this one are products of Stephen King in some way, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For as over-the-top as this film is, it also gets pretty creative with its action scenes too, particularly the games that you see Ben Richards go through in the Running Man show itself. This human hockey game that the contestants play is creatively inhumane, and the section with this bobsled going through a slide was filmed and edited perfectly. You really feel like you're right there with the contestants when they go through this thing. I honestly kinda wanna try this in real life, even though I'm sure that would be a disaster. And while I can neither confirm nor deny this to be true, I wouldn't be surprised if the Buzzsaw character ended up serving as inspiration for Bonesaw from Spider-Man. The fight scene Arnold has with him is also pretty intense. If you've seen this film like I have, you know how nanners the outcome is. I don't know if I can get away with showing it on YouTube since it's pretty graphic, but the following clip sums up my reaction beautifully.
Dude!
I kinda like to think of these games as the R-rated versions of the gladiatorial games that Dib was forced to compete in during that Invader Zim episode where he needed to get his father to sign something. Ironic, considering that Professor Membrane himself is the announcer of the games in this film. I'm not even kidding.
And there he goes! Fireball's on his way! And Dynamo's down, but not out. Back to you, David. Not scientifically possible!
There are other things about this film I also enjoyed. Being a cheesy 80s action movie, this film is full of one-liners that I got a kick out of, such as this one reference to what happens to Buzzsaw.
What happened to Buzzsaw?
He had the split.
As well as this moment.
Don't forget to send me a copy.
But the one-liners aren't the only funny parts of the movie. Hearing a synthesizer rendition of Ride of the Valkyries kinda gave me a chuckle, and there's this weird Tron opera that interrupts the games at one point. That was so bizarre I couldn't help but laugh, and at another point, Arnold basically turns into Donkey Kong, I guess? There's also a scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger is in danger, and he's rescued by Fleetwood Mac drummer Mick Fleetwood. Now there's a sentence I don't think has ever been uttered out loud in the history of mankind. When it comes to the acting, I think Richard Dawson gives the best performance. He plays the Running Man's host, Damon Killian, with a last name for a first name and a first name for a last name. During my research for this review, I learned that in real life, Dawson hosted a bunch of different game shows before taking this role. So it's kinda neat seeing him sort of satirize himself here. His demeanor early on surprisingly reminded me of Roger from American Dad, the funniest character in that show. And bizarrely enough, the scenes of people telling this guy off are some of the best scenes in the film, along with the way Killian gets his comeuppance at the very end. I like how Ben proves his innocence during this part of the movie too. It's great seeing this audience cheer for something real after seeing them get brainwashed throughout the movie. Which brings me back to some of the more commentary-centered aspects. You know how I mentioned earlier that this film was initially going to be darker and have deeper themes with Christopher Reeve as the star? Well, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was brought in, the script went through numerous rewrites before ending up like the movie we see today. I point this out because I feel like some of those themes did survive in the final cut, albeit in small doses. That is to say, this film has unfortunately ended up being a lot more timely than one would expect a Schwarzenegger action vehicle from 1987 to be. which is so ironic considering that this film's also very much a product of its time. The film may be set in 2017, but it looks and sounds like something from 1987. Then again, 80s nostalgia was kind of everywhere during the real 2017, so I guess you could say this film accidentally predicted cassette futurism or retrofuturism. I bizarrely know a lot of people my age who do collect cassettes and VHS tapes. Not to mention that this aesthetic has a lot in common with Vaporwave, which I definitely remember being widely popular at the time. But then there are predictions that hit way too close to home. For starters, the film shows that the gap between the wealthy and the impoverished keeps growing in its universe, which is especially noticeable in one scene where a bunch of civilians in a slum somewhere are watching the game show on a giant screen publicly. This image definitely says a lot with very little, I think. And to top it all off, there's also the extremely unfortunate prediction of AI and deepfake technology, which sadly seems to keep growing as time keeps passing despite how much I don't want it to. As I mentioned during the premise, Ben Richards is publicly framed for firing at innocent civilians, and during the games, footage of him doing this is shown to the audience. Even though at the beginning of the movie, Ben straight up refuses to follow orders that he's given to do that very thing. Plus, everyone on the helicopter straight up shames him for it and commits the very crime he's framed for. There's also another moment where Killian manipulates game footage to make it look like Ben and Amber got killed in the games, even though,
spoiler alert,
they're still alive at the end of the movie. While deepfakes may not be quite at the level seen in this film, I sadly can see them being that advanced someday, even though I better turn out to be wrong about this. If it were up to me, AI would only be allowed for medical-related things. That's it. Anything that's used for creative purposes or to take jobs away is... How did Kathy Bates put it in The Waterboy again?
The devil!
Precisely. Anyway, getting back on track with the movie, even though the 80s action thriller and dystopian sci-fi tones meshed okay for the most part, there are one or two moments that don't work. There's this one bit where Arnold breaks the fourth wall, and it's honestly extremely distracting. And I usually love fourth wall stuff, so that's saying a lot.
I'll be back.
Killian, I'll be back.
There's also the song that plays at the end of the movie, though that could be a nitpick since I'm admittedly not a fan of cheesy 80s power ballads. This film ends on one being played leading into the credits. And I get why it's being used here since a lot of action movies back then would end on a song like this, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem to fit the vibe of the rest of the film even when it is at its most over the top. But despite all of that, I am still glad I checked this movie out overall. It's definitely a victim of its time more often than not, but the action scenes get pretty creative most of the time. Arnold kills it in all the ways you'd want him to in a movie like this, and the film as a whole mostly finds the perfect balance between being a turn your brain off and enjoy the dumb fun kind of movie, while still having some interesting things to say every once in a while. Then again, this film is getting a remake. Maybe that film might take more advantage of certain story aspects that this film only took slight advantage of. I know the director of this version also made Hot Fuzz, a film that brilliantly combined high-octane action set pieces with clever and sharp writing, so maybe the remake will find a more perfect balance. Though mostly I'm just hoping this film lets the story do the talking more than some blockbusters in recent years that tried the same thing but epically failed at. As far as this movie goes though, if you're not a fan of dystopian sci-fi thrillers that tend to have lots of commentary in them, this one might not turn you off nearly as much as some others, but if you're not a fan of cheesy 80s action films, particularly some of the more violent ones, I would definitely skip this one. But if you're an Arnold Schwarzenegger fan and just want to have a good time while being given a little something to think about every so often, this might not be a bad show to tune into. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and also be sure to check out CineMaine's website and be on the lookout for future CineMaine content.